Hello, I'm Joshua Kitts of Composed Dream Games, and today I want to talk about Invincible, a comic book series that I am a great fan of. I have read through and collected most of all of the 144 issue run of Invincible, and Amazon Prime cartoon has just come out recently. And I want to talk about Invincible's power level, specifically in how it relates to tabletop role playing games. Now, as the designer of a tabletop role playing game called Simple Superheroes, I'll mostly be talking about it in terms of how power level has been implemented here. But I do think the discussion will be relevant for a lot of other superhero gaming and so on. So, when the series ended with issue 144, as a longtime fan of the series and collector of individual issues for the last few years at the very least, I immediately had to post up a write-up about what I thought in terms of how I would built Mark Grayson Invincible with the Simple Superheroes engine. And one of the things that I mulled over briefly before settling on it was that Invincible is a planetary tier superhero and a great example of a planetary tier superhero. You can certainly make the argument that some of the things that he does and overcomes or accomplishes in his career feel like they could be at the cosmic tier, but the easiest way to counter that is that the kind of foes he's facing really don't have a cosmic tier flavor. So while he's capable of tremendous feats and some crazy things happen, they're a little more grounded and a little more certainly in scope, which what I would call a planetary character could do. So what does that mean? How does, say, this differentiate? What does planetary tier mean versus cosmic? These sort of labels get thrown around a fair bit, even in just regular discussions of comic books. How is that implemented in Simple Superheroes? And how do the rules differ? And I'll tie it back with some specific examples of what Invincible does and can do in the series, might include a clip or so, and in the comics. So, the first thing to say is that in Simple Superheroes, the technical or mechanical way you build characters doesn't really change. It's what they can accomplish. So you'll be playing a planetary tier game. You'd be playing a cosmic tier game. You'd be playing an empowered tier game, or you'd be playing a vigilante tier game. So easy ways to conceptualize that are vigilante tier would be Daredevil, and similar, the Defender series type of supers. They have some sort of superpower. They can fight people with relatively low-level superpowers, but they're kind of much more bounded into what reality would actually allow somebody to do. Just a lower-level power tier overall. And then I would commonly illustrate the empowered tier with Spider-Man and the kind of foes he can fight. So, yeah, the Sandman can slip under doors and so on, and a whole bunch of other things that, Spider-Man, while being more just a strong, fast, agile guy, doesn't have quite as many wacky powers. The kind of people he fights do. So that's another good way of characterizing it. And then we have planetary tier, which, as I've said, Invincible is a great example of. One of the first things he does is, when he gets his powers, is he throws a bag of trash into low orbit. It like goes up into the sky and takes like a day or something before crashing down in London, UK. Um, um, and that's the sort of thing that you can do as a planetary tier character. You know, you can fly in around the world in a relatively short time. You can head out to the moon in a relatively short time. Um, the actual constraints of what you can do in a reasonable town can vary a little bit from game to game, but a planetary tier character, so a planetary tier character in one table or one universe might be a little bit different from another, but the basic scope of sorts of things that they're doing should be consistent. And then, of course, we have cosmic tier characters who are sort of off the charts. Silver Surfer is a great example. Doctor Strange doing all sorts of crazy, insane things, fighting otherworldly entities from other dimensions and all sorts of things. Often confronting threats who have the power to, you know, rewrite all of reality, those sorts of things. That is where the cosmic tier comes in. I think it's a very common analysis error that people make when they're talking about superheroes. Um, and this is hardly an original idea. Other people have espoused this, so I've incorporated this idea into the rules here. That power tier doesn't reflect the scale of action, right? So you can confront scale of action is a completely different thing. You can have a planetary tier character dealing with street level issues in a plot. You can have a cosmic tier character dealing with street level issues. You could even have a vigilante tier character dealing with galactic issues, right? Depending on the setup. Your Guardians of the Galaxy tend to have definitely a lower feel in terms of power tier, but they're sort of operating at this galactic level where they're going on adventures and dealing with alien armadas and stuff fairly often. Now, I am not an expert on the Guardians of the Galaxy, so feel free to comment if you feel that that's a mischaracterization of what they actually do in the comic books. Yeah, so scale of action is a separate idea. I discuss it in Simple Superheroes as street level, so your neighborhood, sometimes your city, perhaps. Regional would be cities and provinces, maybe going to other cities, those sorts of things. And then you have global scale heroes, which for most of Invincible's career, he's dealing with global scale threats. So, which they do tend to tie together. So, a planetary tier character would most often deal with global scale threats, but that's not required by any means. You're not bounded by that. The scale of the action is different. And then there's the final fourth category, which is galactic. So interstellar, pan-dimensional operations, those sorts of things. Definitely towards the end, Invincible was dealing with more galactic style threats near the end. The Viltrumite Empire, the coalition of planets, being sent back in time by a cosmic tier entity to fix all of the mess and of the timeline, essentially. Again, it's sort of a galactic scale plotline. So these are different things. So I'll talk a little bit about mechanization, perhaps, and then I want to bring back in some examples. Well, maybe I'll go to some examples first, actually, of planetary tier actions that we've seen already. So one of the things that Mark Grayson and his father Omni-Man do during their training, which I think is actually an homage to a Bugs Bunny thing. But anyway, proving the world is round. They throw a baseball around the Earth to each other. Um, is that a little over the top? Absolutely. Would it take probably a fairly long time? Yeah. Um, but they're also shown in the show to be waiting for the ball to come around for quite a while. The trick, of course, in doing something like that would be throwing it hard enough to travel around the Earth, but not so hard that it would escape the planet. But you worry less about those actual physics type thing once you start getting to the planetary tier, right? You want your characters to be able to lift an aircraft carrier if their thing is strength, or work together to lift a cruise liner, which is something that has happened in the Invincible run. One of the reasons I think reading Invincible would be a very good exercise for somebody who's GMing Simple Superheroes or any superhero role-playing game is because it is one author throughout the entire 144 issue run. So you get a very consistent, what can this person do, how do they act, etc. Which is also very refreshing compared to often changing authors and doing reversals on storylines and so on, but also getting very different senses of what the character can do. So I appreciate it a lot for that consistency of of authorial intent and the power level of the character. And it also, Mark Grayson's abilities, Invincibles, also grow a lot over the course of the series, which makes a lot of sense. And it is also something that I do a lot in Simple Superheroes. There's lots of room for growth for your characters to improve and get better. Now, Invincible doesn't get any completely wacky new powers throughout the run. He stays consistent, but he's clearly also growing in ability throughout, and capability and competence. So I mentioned very quickly that mechanically, what you can do or how you build your characters doesn't actually change. So you decide at the beginning of your campaign what power tier you're going to play at, and that informs the color of what you can do. It does affect a few mechanics that aren't directly in line with if you're fighting a villain who's of a similar power level, right? You would build lower level power villains with fewer talents, but they generally operate the same way, so you'd fight them the same way. The big change is how you interact with normal people, right? At the planetary tier level, for instance, it's a single cop firing a gun at you is just never a threat. You shouldn't even be rolling for that. It's just not something a planetary tier character needs to worry about. You need to be dealing with like a whole military company or a specially trained strike force kitted out with specialized gear to try to take down people like you, for that to matter. If you're fighting somebody with pretty destructive powers or dealing with a villain, you know, they could destroy many buildings in a city and cause a great deal of problems in just a couple minutes. So these are the sort of things. There are specifically mechanics for fighting things like military companies. These are horde rules. So there's mechanics for how can you make your planetary or cosmic tier characters fight a horde of enemies. Thematically, that might be a different type of horde, of course. The things making it up would be different. And how you handle normal people are different, and there's some rules for things that are like strike forces. So at the planetary tier, you can make the case that a strike force would be made up of essentially vigilante tier characters, right? They would all be highly trained or have some fancy tech that would allow them to tangle with you for a little while, but you'd be easily able to take out individuals in it. But that's not where the biggest threat from fighting those are. Generally speaking, they're great for supporting a major villain who's built the same way you are, using a full set of talents. Um, and that can make very engaging stories. So a lot of the difference is just conceptual in what somebody can achieve. So yeah, Invincible can throw something into low orbit. He can take a villain and grab them and chuck them into space if that's what he wants to do. If something's going to explode or there's a bomb or whatever, he can just do that. It opens up the possibilities of how you're going to deal with challenges. Now, obviously, eventually, this certainly hasn't come up in the Amazon Prime show yet, but eventually, Invincible is able to travel between planets and solar systems. That's not generally something that I would consider a planetary tier, but it's easy to just kind of be like, this is a fairly common trope, so it's easy to just kind of be like, yes, of course, you can survive in space, you have the required energy resistance to do it, you can fly, it's reasonable to think that you can accelerate kind of indefinitely and visit other planets. And we'll allow that because we want to be able to tell that kind of story. So that's not necessarily a power or anything. Just like somebody who could go between dimensions at this power level, of course, could easily go to other Earths or other planets using that power. Similarly, with some sort of teleportation type thing, would probably or could be allowed to do the same thing. Perhaps it would require them to build gates, and that would take time before they could arrive. The mere fact that there are clear constraints narratively, on how long it can take to go between planets, and that affects things, demonstrates that this isn't really a cosmic tier game, because if travel was your power in a cosmic tier game, you'd be able to get from anywhere to anywhere in essentially no time. That wouldn't be a constraint for you. For instance, one of the example cosmic tier characters in here is, and this is a very powerful one, is Kronos, who is the cosmic manifestation of time. So he essentially is time. So of course he can essentially show up at any time in a place that he feels he needs to be. Now, clearly he has high-ranked talents that allow him to do that. I would encourage you to check out the Amazon Prime show, to pick up some comic books of the Invincible run. They are definitely worth the read. And I hope that also has piqued your interest in simple superheroes. You can pick it up at the Composed Dream Games Marketplace. The physical book, this is my beat-up copy that I use at the table all the time, and I've been doing so for many years. You can pick up the physical book for $30 Canadian from the Composed Dream Game Marketplace, and you can get a PDF for $15. The print version does come with a PDF as well. Those prices are in Canadian. I will imagine I will be talking about some other things along these lines, so I hope you will subscribe and keep an eye out for those. My next video will probably be about some of the other games that are available on the Composed Dream Game Marketplace. Perhaps Fox Magic, or maybe Palanquin, which I just ran this weekend at Kingston Area Gamers Convention. Well, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and talk about what power level you think some characters should be at. And I will also link to the write-up that I did of Invincible, and maybe I'll think about doing a write-up of how I would build an Adam Eve type character as well, because I think that would be pretty interesting. I reread her sort of origin issues recently. There was a couple of those. So, yeah, maybe I'll do that too. Anyway, good gaming.